He meant it as a joke. A cruel setup. Invite the cleaning lady to a billionaire's gala. Let the champagne crowd gawk, smirk, and whisper. But when the grand doors opened, the room fell dead silent. She walked in. Her midnight blue gown flowed behind her like liquid starlight, and diamonds shimmered at her throat with every confident step. This wasn't the woman Marcus had seen pushing a mop at midnight. This woman owned the room. She didn't just arrive. She ascended. The same hands that had scrubbed his floors now moved with grace, power, and unshakable poise. And in that moment, the joke turned on him. While the entire world watched. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow at the same time we'll bring you another story of Black people leading the way that you won't want to miss. 3 days earlier, Marcus Wellington had been riding high on his latest business victory. His real estate empire had just closed a $1 billion deal, and he was feeling invincible in the way that only comes from having more money than most small countries. That's when he'd seen Rosa Martinez mopping the floors of his office building's lobby at midnight, just as she had every night for 3 years. An idea had struck him. Cruel, thoughtless, but hilarious in his warped mind. His annual charity gala was coming up, the kind of event where Manhattan's elite gathered to write checks and pat themselves on the back. What if he invited the cleaning lady? What if he told her it was a special recognition for her hard work? The thought of watching her fumble with the wrong fork while his friends whispered and snickered made him laugh out loud. "Excuse me," he'd called out that night, stopping Rosa mid-mop. She'd looked up with those tired eyes he'd never really noticed before, eyes that seemed to hold depths he couldn't fathom. "Yes, Mr. Wellington? I'm hosting a charity event this Saturday night. I'd like you to attend as my guest. Consider it a thank you for your service." Rosa had studied his face for a long moment, and something had flickered in her expression. Not gratitude, not excitement, but something else entirely. Something that should have warned him. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Wellington. I'll be there." She'd given him an address to send the invitation, and he'd barely glanced at it before handing it off to his assistant. The Riverside Drive address meant nothing to him. Probably some rundown apartment building in a neighborhood he'd never visit. Now, watching her emerge from that limousine like African royalty, Marcus realized he'd made a terrible miscalculation. The doorbell rang with the deep, resonant chime that had announced visitors to the Wellington mansion for 3 generations. Marcus straightened his bow tie, put on his most condescending smile, and prepared to greet his entertainment for the evening. His guests were already assembled in the grand ballroom, 50 of New York's wealthiest socialites, all expecting the usual evening of champagne, caviar, and carefully choreographed charity. He opened the door, and his prepared smirk died on his lips. Rosa Martinez stood before him, transformed. Her hair was elegantly styled in a way that framed her face like a work of art. The midnight blue gown she wore wasn't from any department store. It was clearly couture, with intricate beadwork that caught the light like captured stars. But it wasn't just the clothes that had changed. Her posture was different, her bearing regal. She held herself like someone who'd never questioned her right to be anywhere. "Good evening, Marcus," she said, and even her voice seemed different, richer, more confident. "Thank you for the invitation. Rosa, you look..." Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal his shock. "Different than you expected?" There was something in her tone, a knowing quality that made his stomach tighten. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside, his mind racing. Behind Rosa, he could see the limousine driver waiting patiently. And it wasn't just any driver. The man wore the kind of uniform that suggested serious money, serious connections. As Rosa entered the foyer, her heels clicked against the marble, with the confidence of someone who belonged in places like this. She moved through his home like she was surveying it, not admiring it, and that distinction made Marcus's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "Your home is lovely," she said, but there was something in her tone that suggested she'd seen better. From the ballroom came the sound of conversation and laughter, the tinkling of crystal glasses and the soft melody of the string quartet Marcus had hired. His guests were waiting, expecting their host to return with his amusing little sideshow. But as Rosa turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a directness that made him want to look away, Marcus realized that he was no longer the one in control of this evening. The ballroom fell silent as Marcus entered with Rosa on his arm. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward them, and Marcus felt the weight of their collective gaze. He'd expected whispers, barely concealed laughter, the kind of cruel amusement that his circle excelled at. Instead, there was something else in the air, a tension he couldn't identify. "Everyone," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room, "I'd like you to meet Rosa Martinez. She works in my building." But even as he spoke, he noticed something strange happening. Several of his guests weren't looking at Rosa with the condescension he'd expected. Instead, their faces showed something that looked almost like recognition. Mrs. Pemberton, the widow of a steel magnate, stepped forward with the expression of absolute shock. "Rosa? Rosa Martinez? Is that really you?" Marcus felt Rosa's arm tense slightly under his, but her voice remained perfectly composed. "Hello, Margaret. It's been a long time." The room erupted in whispers, but they weren't the mocking whispers Marcus had anticipated. These were whispers of surprise, of recognition, of something that sounded almost like reverence. "I can't believe it," breathed Jonathan Ashford, one of the city's most prominent lawyers. "Rosa Martinez. Here, after all these years." Marcus looked from face to face, seeing expressions he couldn't decode. His carefully planned humiliation was unraveling, but he didn't understand how or why. Who was Rosa Martinez, that these people, his people, the cream of New York society, knew her name? "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight with confusion and growing alarm. "Am I missing something here?" It was Rosa who answered, her voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "Marcus invited me tonight as his guest. I thought it was time I accepted an invitation to one of these gatherings again." Again? Marcus's mind raced. What did she mean again? Mrs. Pemberton was still staring at Rosa like she'd seen a ghost. "We all thought, after what happened, we heard you'd left the city entirely." Rosa's smile was enigmatic, revealing nothing and everything at once. "I never left, Margaret. I've been here all along, just living a different kind of life." The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. But before he could process them fully, Rosa had moved away from his side and was walking into the crowd of his guests who were now surrounding her like she was the guest of honor, instead of his intended victim. Marcus stood frozen as he watched his meticulously planned evening slip completely out of his control. Rosa moved through his guests with the easy grace of someone who'd attended 1,000 such gatherings, accepting kisses on both cheeks, engaging in conversations that clearly referenced shared memories and experiences he knew nothing about. "Marcus, you sly devil," came a voice behind him. He turned to find Charles Blackwood, one of the city's most successful investment bankers, approaching with a glass of champagne and an expression of grudging admiration. "How did you manage to get Rosa Martinez to come out of retirement?" "Retirement?" Marcus managed to croak. "Don't play coy with us," Charles laughed. "Rosa Martinez, the Rosa Martinez. Hell, she probably taught half the people in this room everything they know about high society. Her grandmother's charity galas were legendary. And Rosa herself, well, she was practically New York royalty before she disappeared." The words hit Marcus like hammer blows. Royalty, legendary. The Rosa Martinez. His mind struggled to process what he was hearing, to reconcile the woman who cleaned his office floors with the person Charles was describing. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Charles looked at him with genuine surprise. "You really don't know, do you? Rosa Martinez is old money, Marcus. Really old money. Her great-grandfather made his fortune in shipping, her grandfather in steel, and her grandmother, well, Esperanza Martinez was the queen of New York society for 30 years. Rosa was being groomed to take over the family foundation to carry on the tradition." "Then why?" Marcus couldn't finish the question, but Charles seemed to understand. "Why is she cleaning office buildings?" Charles shrugged. "That's the mystery, isn't it? About 15 years ago, she just vanished. Stopped coming to events, stopped taking calls, stopped being Rosa Martinez. Some people said there was a scandal, others said she'd had a breakdown, but nobody knew for sure." Marcus turned to look across the room, where Rosa was deep in conversation with Senator Patricia Hayes. discussing what sounded like international development projects, with the kind of knowledge that only came from direct experience. But if she's really, Marcus began. One of the wealthiest women in the state? Charles finished. Oh, she is. The Martinez family trust is worth more than most small countries' GDP. The question is, Marcus, how did you get her to come tonight? And more importantly, what does she want? As if sensing his gaze, Rosa looked up from her conversation and met Marcus's eyes across the crowded room. Her smile was mysterious, knowing, and somehow terrifying. The evening progressed like a fever dream. Marcus watched in growing horror and fascination as Rosa commanded his party with effortless grace. She discussed art with museum curators, debated policy with politicians, and shared business insights that had several of his guests pulling out their phones to take notes. This wasn't the quiet cleaning lady who'd mopped his floors for 3 years. This was someone else entirely. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself increasingly isolated. His guests were gravitating toward Rosa, drawn by her charisma and the mystique of her unexpected appearance. The charity auction, which was supposed to be the evening's centerpiece, became a backdrop to Rosa's triumphant return to society. Finally, as the crowd began to thin and guests started making their departures, Marcus cornered Rosa near the French doors that led to his garden terrace. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice rough with confusion, and something that might have been fear. Rosa nodded calmly. "I thought you might." They stepped out onto the terrace, away from the remaining guests. The night air was cool, and the city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Who are you?" Marcus finally asked. "I'm exactly who I've always been," Rosa replied. "The question is, who did you think I was?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "You clean office buildings. You work nights. You're poor?" Rosa's voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. "Yes, I work nights. Yes, I clean office buildings. But I've never been poor, Marcus. Not in the way you mean." "Then why?" The question burst out of him. "Why would you do that work if you don't have to? Why would you let people like me treat you like you're invisible?" Rosa was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the city. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. 15 years ago, I lost someone very important to me. Someone who died because of the callousness of people who thought their money made them better than everyone else. After that, I couldn't bear to be part of this world anymore. But I also couldn't bear to completely leave it. She turned to face him, and in the moonlight, Marcus could see tears glittering in her eyes. "So I found a way to be invisible in plain sight. To watch, to learn, to see who people really are when they think no one important is watching." Marcus felt his throat close with the implications of her words. "You invited me here as a joke," Rosa continued, her voice steady despite the tears Marcus could see threatening to fall. "You thought it would be amusing to humiliate the cleaning lady in front of your wealthy friends. You wanted to watch me struggle with the wrong fork, to see me fumble with conversations I couldn't understand." Marcus opened his mouth to deny it, but the words died in his throat. She was right, and they both knew it. "For 3 years, I've watched you, Marcus. I've seen how you treat people you think are beneath you. I've heard you on the phone making deals that put families out of their homes. I've seen you laugh at the misfortune of others. I've watched you become exactly the kind of person." She stopped, her voice catching. "Who what?" Marcus whispered. "Who killed my son?" The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his hand finding the terrace railing for support. "Not directly," Rosa continued, her voice growing stronger. "You never met Michael. But you might as well have. He was 23, brilliant, working as a community organizer in the Bronx. He was trying to prevent a slumlord from evicting an entire building full of families. The building had no heat in winter, no working elevators, rats in the walls, but the families couldn't afford to move, and they had nowhere else to go." Marcus felt sick. He had a terrible feeling he knew where this story was going. The slumlord was being pressured by developers who wanted the land. They offered him more money than he'd ever dreamed of, but only if he could clear the building fast. So one night, in the middle of winter, he shut off all the utilities and changed the locks while the families were at work. Rosa's voice was steady now, but Marcus could see her hands shaking. Michael tried to help them. He organized protests. He called the media. He even tried to raise money to help them relocate. But it was too little, too late. The building was condemned, the families were scattered, and 3 people died that winter because they had nowhere to go. One of them was an 8-year-old girl named Sophia. Marcus wanted to speak, to say something, but no words came. Michael couldn't live with the guilt. He blamed himself for not doing more, for not being stronger, for not having the power to fight the system. He took his own life 6 months later. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of her revelation. "I'm sorry," Marcus finally whispered, and he meant it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. Rosa nodded, accepting his apology but not absolving him. The developer who orchestrated that whole scheme, he made millions from that deal. He used that money to build his real estate empire. He's made billions since then, buying up properties, forcing out families, gentrifying neighborhoods without a thought for the people he displaces. Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Rosa, his name was Marcus Wellington. The words hung in the air, between them, like a death sentence. Marcus felt his legs give out, and he sank into one of the terrace chairs, his head in his hands. The pieces were falling into place now, the connections becoming clear in a way that made him sick to his stomach. "The Riverside Project," he whispered. 15 years ago, that was you, your son. "Michael Martinez Stevens," Rosa said quietly. "He kept his father's name, but he was my baby, my only child." Marcus looked up at her. This woman who had cleaned his floors for 3 years, who had been invisible to him for so long and saw her clearly for the first time. She wasn't just wealthy, wasn't just connected. She was the mother of the young man whose death had haunted Marcus's dreams for 15 years, even when he tried to forget it. "You've been planning this," he said. It wasn't a question. Not planning. Waiting. Rosa's voice was calm, resolved. "I've been waiting for you to show me who you really are. Tonight, you did." "What do you want?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the city lights. When she spoke, her voice was soft but implacable. "I want you to understand what you've done. Not just to my son, but to all the families you've displaced over the years. I want you to understand that every fortune built on the suffering of others comes with a price." She turned to face him, and in her eyes, Marcus saw not hatred, but something far more frightening. Justice. "Tomorrow morning, the Times will run a story about your business practices, about the families you've displaced, the communities you've destroyed, the connections between your empire and the deaths of people like my son. It will be thoroughly researched, completely accurate, and utterly devastating." Marcus felt his world crumbling around him. "You can't." "I can, and I will. Because I have something you'll never have, Marcus. I have the truth, and I have the power to make sure it's heard." Rosa walked to the terrace railing, her elegant gown flowing behind her like liquid night. "The car is waiting for me. Thank you for the invitation, Marcus." It was illuminating. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at him one last time. "For what it's worth, it's not too late. You could choose to be better. You could choose to use your wealth to help instead of harm. My son believed people could change, even until the end. I'm not sure I share his optimism, but I suppose we'll see." Marcus watched her leave. This woman who had played the long game with a patience and precision that humbled him. As her limousine disappeared into the night, he remained on the terrace, staring out at the city he'd thought he owned, finally understanding that some debts can never be paid, only acknowledged, and perhaps, if he was very lucky, forgiven. The cleaning lady had arrived like royalty, because she was royalty, and she had just dethroned a king.